Welcome back, everyone. Ready to dive into another deep dive?
Always.
Awesome. So today we're looking at this article by Dr. James Horrocks. It's called The Land of the Free, an unfree political economy and a select few who benefit.
Catchy title.
Right. And with elections coming up, I thought it'd be interesting to, really dissect this.
Yeah, the timing is perfect. It's interesting. Right off the bat, Dr. Horrocks argues that the U.S. system is basically designed to benefit just a small group of people.
Wow, that's a pretty bold statement, right?
Hmm.
So where do we even begin with that? I guess one of the first things that jumped out at me was this idea of an illusion of choice in our elections.
Yeah, so the article dives into this concept that both of the big parties, Democrats and Republicans, are kind of operating within the same system.
You mean like even though they seem different on the surface?
Exactly. It's what's often called neoliberal capitalism. Basically, championing free markets and less regulation.
Right, but the article argues that this can actually make inequality worse.
Yeah, that's a key point. So even though they use different language, both parties are like super entrenched in this system.
And that's where the whole illusion of choice thing comes in.
Right. So it's like you have these two options, but they're both coming from the same fundamental framework.
But does that mean our votes don't even matter?
Well, the article doesn't go that far. I think it's more about highlighting this feeling of having limited options.
I can see that. Like, have you ever felt like no matter who wins, the same problems just keep coming back?
Exactly. And the article even suggests that alternative political systems, like socialism, are kind of intentionally kept out of the mainstream conversation.
It's like that word socialism is almost taboo.
Yeah. The article uses examples like East Germany and Cuba to show how these systems are often portrayed in a negative light.
But isn't that a bit oversimplifying things?
Well, the article argues that it creates this narrative that capitalism is the only option, even with all its problems.
So it's like we're being steered towards certain choices without even realizing it.
Right. And that leads to the next big question the article raises. Who actually benefits from all this?
Yeah, they get pretty specific about that.
The article points to corporations, super wealthy individuals, and those in political power.
They even call out Elon Musk, right?
Oh, yeah. They use him as, like, a prime example.
What did they say about him again?
Well, they point out how his wealth has grown, partly because of government contracts and also his influence, on public opinion.
And that he's not just an isolated case.
Exactly. The article argues that things like tax cuts and deregulation, which are often presented as good for everyone.
Right, like a rising tide lifts all boats kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. But the article says they actually mostly benefit the wealthy.
While the rest of us are dealing with expensive healthcare and wages that aren't keeping up, it's like
the system is working exactly as intended for those at the top.
and everyone else is left to scramble for whatever's left. Which brings us to another interesting point the article makes. This whole idea of the U.S. as a Christian nation.
Yeah, that's where it gets really thought-provoking.
They don't hold back on the criticism there. Like, how can a nation that claims to be based on Christian values have so much suffering?
Right. The article points to all the wealth held by religious institutions, many of which don't pay taxes, and criticizes them for not doing more to help.
Like with the homelessness crisis.
Exactly. The author says churches are often silent on those kinds of issues.
It's almost like they're more worried about keeping their own position.
That's the implication, yeah.
So do you think it's fair to say that the U.S. maybe doesn't live up to that whole Christian nation image?
Well, the article definitely makes you question it. It points out this disconnect between what's preached and what's actually happening.
Yeah, it's not just about inaction either. They also criticize religious leaders who support policies that help the rich while saying they're upholding Christian values.
Right. It makes you wonder about the consistency there. Like, are their actions really matching their words? And this whole hypocrisy thing, it goes even further when you think about how the U.S. calls itself the leader of the free world.
Oh, yeah, the article really digs into that.
Like, millions of Americans are struggling with poverty and healthcare and even homelessness. But the U.S. is supposed to be this beacon of freedom for everyone else.
Right. It's kind of like, how can you be a champion of freedom if your own citizens don't have access to basic needs?
Yeah, the article basically says that image is a contradiction. And then it goes on to question if U.S. foreign aid is really all that altruistic.
So it's like maybe it's more about, maintaining power than genuinely helping other countries.
It seems like it, right? The article says that the U.S. system, like both here and abroad, prioritizes profits and the elite over, well, ordinary people.
Hmm. I see. And they even give those examples, right? Like those laws about feeding the homeless.
Yeah, the article argues that those policies are more about protecting businesses than helping people. It's about keeping things orderly.
Which, makes sense when you think about how much influence corporations have on policy. The article mentions lobbying and that revolving door between politics and business.
Oh, yeah. Where politicians become lobbyists and vice versa, it's like they're all connected.
Exactly. So is the article saying that the system is basically rigged?
Well, it definitely suggests that ordinary people have very little power when it comes to corporate influence.
It all sounds pretty bleak, to be honest. But I remember the article didn't just end there, right?
No, not at all.
Yeah.
There's this call to action. It wants people to fight back against the status quo and work towards something better.
Like a more just society.
Exactly. And what's really interesting is that it ends on a hopeful note. It doesn't just criticize, it encourages us to imagine a different reality.
So it's not about just complaining, but about actually making a change.
Right. The article says that true freedom means more than just voting. It's about changing how we think about power and wealth and responsibility. Demanding a system that actually reflects our values.
That's a tall order, but I like the sentiment. So how do we actually do that? How do we go from, critiquing the system to actually changing it?
Yeah, well, the article doesn't give like a step-by-step guide or anything, but it does give us some ideas.
Like what?
Well, it says we should support candidates who are willing to challenge the status quo and advocate for policies that help everyone, not just the elite.
Okay, so voting is still important.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But it's also about more than that. The article says we need to amplify the voices of people who are often ignored and hold those in power accountable.
So it's about being active, not passive.
Right. Remember, real change usually starts from the ground up.
Wow. So much to think about, huh? We've covered a lot of ground today. This whole idea of an illusion of choice, the realities of inequality in a country that calls itself, a Christian nation and the leader of the free world. It's heavy stuff.
Yeah, and what's really interesting to me is how the article ties all these different things together, like politics, economics, religion, foreign policy. They're all connected, right?
It's all part of the same system, basically.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
according to Dr. Horrocks, that system is set up to benefit a small group of people at the expense of everyone else.
But it's not about, pointing fingers. It's about recognizing our own place in all this, right?
Yeah.
And asking, what can we do to change things?
Absolutely. The article is a call to action. It's
Yeah.
like stop being complacent and start demanding a system that actually works for everyone.
Easier said than done, though, right?
For sure. But the article reminds us that we have more power than we think.
Okay, so as we head into this election, what are some key things listeners should keep in mind? What are the big takeaways?
Well, I think the article really encourages us to look beyond the surface. Don't just take things at face value. Really examine the policies and the motivations behind them.
Like who benefits? Who gets left behind?
Exactly. And are these candidates actually committed to making things better? Or are they just going to keep the same system going?
It's so easy to get caught up in all the campaign promises and the personalities.
Totally. But we got to dig deeper, Understand what's really going on, and then make choices that reflect what we believe in.
And voting isn't the only thing we can do.
Right. It's about staying engaged, holding our leaders accountable, supporting organizations that are fighting for positive change, and using our voices.
Because real change doesn't just happen, magically.
It takes effort. It takes all of us.
This article isn't just about one election or one political party. It's about how we think about our role in society, our responsibility to build a better future.
It's a big challenge, but it's an important one.
It really makes you wonder, if the system is rigged, as the article suggests, what can we actually do about it?
That's the question, isn't it? Where do we go from here? How do we create real, lasting change?
There are no easy answers, but I think this article gives us some hope. It reminds us that we have power.
By asking questions, organizing, demanding better, supporting each other, that's how we start to change things.
That's how we build a society that's truly just and equal, where everyone has a chance to thrive.
A society that lives up to its ideals.
Well said. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it gave you something to think about and maybe even inspired you to take action.
Yeah, get involved. Make your voice heard.
Until next time, stay curious, stay engaged, and keep questioning the world around you.